All right, this is session 3, our final session for the night for Christian counterfeits. We're hitting our first counterfeit up for discussion, which is Mormonism, also known as Latter-day Saints. Today we're going to be looking at some of the history by looking through the lives of the founders and what beliefs that they got started and events related around them. This will set the groundwork for what Amanda will then cover when she comes back next week, wrapping up the rest of Mormonism and then continuing on with the other topics. So that is our goal through today, to see what we can get through in terms of the founders. So without further ado, we will start with Mr. Joseph Smith Jr., born in 1805, died in 1844. He organized what is now the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It is abbreviated as LDS at times, and were also known as the Mormons. This movement was founded in 1830 near Rochester, New York. Its headquarters are in Salt Lake City, Utah. Joseph Smith Jr. was born in Vermont on December 23rd, 1905, to Joseph Smith Sr., a farmer, and Lucy Mack. Growing up, his mother, Lucy Mack, was deeply religious. Her family had left conventional congregationalism and embraced Sikhism, a movement that was looking for a new revelation to restore true Christianity. After she got married, she moved with her husband to New York in 1816, and they became involved in magic and treasure seeking. She then went on to join the Presbyterian Church around 1819. She wrote a book about her son that was later suppressed due to mistakes found within it. His father, Joseph Sr., was suspicious of the clergy and of professing Christians. When his wife joined the Presbyterian Church in 1918, he refused to attend. He spent much of his time digging for buried treasure, considered to be a common practice amongst poor New Englanders at that time. These ventures often blended quests for religious enlightenment with the exercise of magical power, which is where his label as a mystic came from. On more than one occasion, he also attempted to mint his own money. Growing up a farmer's son, in his youth, Joseph was largely deprived of a formal education. However, his parents did their best to make sure that he was instructed in reading, writing, and the ground rules of arithmetic. Because of his father's influence in seeking and treasure seeking and mysticism, what's that? Arithmetic. Yep. For whatever reason, I was reading and I was like, I'm having trouble reading this word as I'm reading it. Yeah, I was like, it is what it is.
It's fine, I'm sorry.
Nope, I appreciate it. Because of his father's influence in treasure seeking and mysticism, Joseph Smith Jr. grew up using peep stones, which ended up being outlawed due to being an occultic practice. He also used divining rods, talismans, and ritualistic magic in varying degrees. These practices did not stop when he received his first visitation or revelation, and he used seer stones to translate the Book of Mormon. So he was familiar with multiple forms of divining or occultic tools, and were a process in forming the religion that came. In 1820, he had what is now considered the first vision at the age of 14. Affected by the great religious excitement that was taking place in New York, he was determined to know which of the many religions or churches he should join. He encountered a passage in the Bible instructing any who lacked wisdom to ask of God. So early one morning, he went to the woods to ask God which church he should join. Allegedly, while praying, he received a vision where two personages that identified themselves as God the Father and Jesus Christ visited him. These two told him not to join any of the churches, as they were all wrong or incorrect. After receiving this vision, even though he did not join any of the churches, he did go about his life as he had previously, treasure hunting alongside his father and his brother. In 1823, Joseph Smith said that he had another vision where he was visited by an angel named Moroni. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing it correctly, full disclosure. This angel supposedly told him of an ancient recording containing God's dealings with the former inhabitants of the American continent. The angel said that it was engraved on gold plates and buried in a hill not far from the Smith's house. Going there the next day, Smith reportedly found the plates in a stone box and saw the angel again. The angel told him not to take the plates, but to return the next year. For 4 years, Smith went back to the hill, and according to his account, finally, on the 22nd of September in year 1827, the angel allowed him to take home the golden plates. Earlier in that same year, on January 18th, 1827, Joseph married Emma Hale. Together they had 11 children, 2 of whom were adopted, but only 5 of whom lived past infancy. For the next 2 years, the Smiths dictated what he said was a translation of the plates, his words taken down by his wife, Emma Hale Smith, then by Martin Harris, a prosperous farmer, and lastly by Oliver Cottery, a school teacher. He said that the angel provided him with interpreters, Urim and Thummim, 2 seer stones set in silver bows fastened to a breastplate, to assist him in the translation that he dictated. During the translation, Smith permitted no one to see the plates, but in June 1829, according to Harris, Cowdery, and one of the Whitmers, the angel appeared and showed them the plates. Smith also showed them to 8 of his family and close friends. The resulting manuscript, the Book of Mormon, was published in March of 1830. The book purports to be a scriptural history of the people of ancient America. It was named for the prophet Mormon, who was thought by the saints to have written the story of his people in the 4th century after Christ. Followers believe that Mormon drew on the records of prophets who had written the history of their own time, beginning with Nephi, who migrated to the Western Hemisphere from Jerusalem around 600 BC. These prophets taught the Christian gospel and prophesied the coming of Christ to America as well as to Palestine. Mormon the prophet wrote that the purpose of this book was to convince its readers that Jesus was Christ and God. The message was especially directed to the remaining descendants of the people in the Book of Mormon, who the Mormons assumed included American Indians. Smith then collected enough believers by the time the Book of Mormon was published to form his own church. This whole section is a lot to read for most of it because I want to make sure that I'm reading what Amanda has set and accurately. I probably won't be looking up much as I'm reading things verbatim. So if there's something that you want to say or something stands out, feel free to raise your hand, and if need be, say my name. I want to make sure I'm not blowing past you while at the same time covering these things. But this is also a lot of history, so if you're also content to listen, go for it. But
the same as out of the book here.
I imagine a lot of it is out of the book. I believe most of it based in the book. On April 6, 1830, Joseph Smith organized the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormons as their common name, near Rochester, New York, and he became its first president. He regarded himself, as did many others, as a prophet, seer, and translator. The Mormon Church has always held the position that they alone represent true Christianity. Mormon leaders have consistently taught that after the death of their apostles, true Christianity fell into complete apostasy, making it necessary for restoration. After the death of the original apostles. The apostles, not their apostles. After the apostles died, true Christianity fell into a complete apostasy, fell away from everything that was true, and it was time for restoration. This comes from page 226 of... Okay, so in page 226 of the Pearl of Great Price, I'm assuming, hang on one second. I'm not sure if this is a quote out of your book or out of the Pearl of Great Price. But apparently, in The Pearl of Great Price, Joseph Smith reveals that the two personages took a rather dim view of the Christian church, and for that matter, of the world at large, and announced that a restoration of true Christianity was needed and that he, Joseph Smith Jr., had been chosen to launch this new dispensation. Smith claimed to lead the church in the same manner in which he translated the Book of Mormon, by direct revelation. He's attributed as having received tons of revelations that helped him deal with the trivial details of administering the LDS, or Latter-day Saints. One such revelation was to take the Book of Mormon to the Indian tribes being settled along the frontier in western Missouri. In September and October of 1830, 4 missionaries set out to Missouri. They preached to the Indians with some small success, but were stopped by government agents for fear that the presence of these preachers would jeopardize the fragile peace that they had with the tribes. Though seemingly unsuccessful in their mission to the Indians, the missionary journey was successful in Kirtland, Ohio, where they made more converts in a few weeks than Smith had in an entire year. Some of those converts from Kirtland, Ohio, even journeyed to visit Joseph Smith in New York. At the end of 1830, Joseph received more revelation that directed the entire church to move to Ohio. Kirtland was chosen as a temporary location due to its success with the Missouri mission, and the Book of Mormon spoke of the construction of a new Jerusalem where all converts were to gather to form a new society called Zion in preparation for the second coming of Christ. Revelations to Joseph Smith had indicated that Zion was to be somewhere in the west, and in the summer of 1831, Smith and other leading figures in the church traveled to Missouri, where he received a revelation designating the exact site for the New Jerusalem near Independence in Jackson County. The people of Jackson County, however, were unhappy and thought the Mormons to be invading their county. In December of 1832, God told Joseph Smith to build a temple in Kirtland, Ohio. The prophet and several others saw the Kirtland Temple in a vision, which provided its design. In June of 1833, construction began on the temple at a time of great poverty in its own church. While this construction was taking place in Kirtland in 1833, the people of Jackson County, Missouri, drove out the Mormons. In the spring of 1834, Joseph Smith organized a private army called Zion's Camp, which was unsuccessful at reinstating his followers on their property in Jackson County. For the next few years, they remained in Clay County, across from the Missouri River, until the Missouri government agreed to open a new area for them, organized as Caldwell County in north-central Missouri. Meanwhile, as a result of the men leaving for Zion's Camp, work on the temple in Kirtland slowed. When they returned, Joseph Smith labored with others in the sandstone quarry, and vigorous efforts to build the temple resumed. Church members made enormous sacrifices to complete this house of God. On March 27, 1836, Joseph dedicated the Kirtland Temple, repeating the ceremony several days later. These two images that you have on your screens and on your slides is the front of the Kirtland, Ohio temple here on the right, and the side view of the same temple on the picture to the left.
That's current picture, right?
I would believe so.
Because I noticed that somewhere the first one got burned down.
What's that?
The first one got burned down.
I imagine that's covered in this. Smith continued to plan for Zion and to work on the organization by updating the leadership structure by creating the quorum of the 12 apostles, where he and an appointed 12 men as apostles, and he made them second in command to himself. He also sent missionaries throughout the United States and to England. He continued to receive revelations, amongst them words of wisdom which cautioned the Mormons, by then known as Latter-day Saints, to avoid tobacco and liquor. He organized a bank as part of a broad economic program, but it was undercapitalized, and the Panic of 1837 caused it to collapse. The collapse hurt many of the investors and depositors, and they blamed Smith. The opposition was so severe that he felt his life was in danger, and in 1838 he and some of the other church leaders fled Kirtland and went to Missouri. In August of 1838, during an election in Missouri, violence broke out against the Mormons as their numbers allowed them to dominate voting results. In the summer and fall of 1838, battles broke out between Missourians and the Mormons that claimed lives on both sides. Governor Boggs issued an order for the Mormons to leave the state or face extermination. On October 31st, 1838, Smith and other leaders were arrested and imprisoned awaiting trial, while the Saints fled eastward to Illinois in search of refuge. In April of 1839, Smith escaped, and he joined his followers clustered along the banks of the Mississippi near Quincy, Illinois. Late in 1839, Smith went to Washington to seek aid from the federal government for the loss of property in Missouri. President Martin Van Buren denied his request. Joseph Smith then went to the Illinois legislature in order to charter a new city to be called Nauvoo, where Mormons would have control of all the agencies of government. It was here that he hoped to legally create Zion. His request was granted, and he launched a renewed missionary effort, gaining converts from all over the United States and Europe and in Great Britain. In 1840, he announced his intention to build a temple in Nauvoo. In 1841, 1 year later, the building project was given the sanction of a formal revelation recorded in their book Doctrines and Covenants, I'm assuming in form of chapter and verse 124, 55. And again, verily, I say unto you, I command you again to build a house in my name, even in this place, that you may prove yourselves unto me, that ye are faithful in all things whatsoever I command you, that I may bless you and crown you with honor, immortality, and eternal life. As a side note from this in this history, that statement and revelation that he reportedly received, does that not have the voice, so to speak, of the Bible? As we discussed, that is a perfect example of, here's something that's not scripture, but has the same mannerisms of conveying information that make it sound like truth. On April 6th, 1941, the temple cornerstones were laid, and he also began to teach the doctrine of eternal marriage. In this temple, faithful saints would be sealed as husband and wife for eternity. In 1843, the doctrine of plural marriage was written down, but early verses about it suggest that part of this doctrine emerged from Joseph Smith's study of the Old Testament, dating back to 1831. It is said that he justified the practice of polygamy by reference to the precedent of Abraham, the first of the Hebrew patriarchs. After he received this commandment, he taught a few associates about it, but he didn't spread his teaching widely in the 1930s. Joseph told associates that an angel appeared to him 3 times between 1834 and 1842, commanding him to proceed with plural marriage when he was hesitant about moving forward. During the third and final appearance, the angel came with a drawn sword, threatening Joseph with destruction unless he went forward and obeyed this commandment fully. Fragments of evidence suggest that Joseph Smith acted on the angel's command by marrying a plural wife, Fanny Alger, in Kirtland, Ohio, in the mid-1830s. However, when that plural marriage ended in separation, he seemed to have set the topic aside until after the Latter-day Saints moved to Nauvoo, Illinois. The first plural marriage there took place when Louisa Beeman and Joseph Smith were sealed in April of 1841. Joseph married many additional wives and authorized other Latter-day Saints to practice plural marriage. The practice spread slowly at first. By June 1844, approximately 29 men and 50 women had entered into plural marriage, in addition to Joseph and his wives. The doctrine of plural marriage went so far beyond conventional Christian teaching and propriety of that day that an influential small group came to believe that Smith had betrayed his divine calling. In addition to his doctrines of eternal and plural marriage, he then instituted the doctrine that living saints could also be baptized for persons who had died without hearing the gospel of Christ. The idea behind that being, if you today, as a living saint, if you had a relative who died and never had a chance to hear this true gospel of the Mormon word, we can baptize you on their behalf and this person is saved. In the spring of 1844, Joseph Smith announced his candidacy for presidency and sent missionaries throughout the country to campaign on his behalf. In April of 1844, dissenters in Nauvoo organized a Reformed church and published a newspaper, the Nauvoo Expositor, to expose Smith's errors. City Council, with Smith presiding as mayor, determined that the expositor was a threat to the peace of the community and a public nuisance. As mayor, Smith was authorized to close the paper, and he did so. On June 12th of the same year, Smith was charged with inciting a riot for the destruction of the press. He ultimately submitted to arrest and was taken to Carthage, the nearby county seat, under the governor's protection. It's said that as Smith left for Carthage, he had premonitions of his own death, which proved to be accurate. On June 27, 1844, in Carthage, Illinois, while awaiting a hearing, a mob stormed the jail, killing Joseph Smith along with his brother Hiram. Joseph Smith was 39 years old. The mob fled, fearing retaliation from the other Mormons. The Mormons were not opposed to war, as evidenced by their not-so-distant past, but they did not retaliate. The bodies of Joseph Smith and his brother were returned to Nauvoo the next day, where approximately 10,000 Latter-day Saints gathered to mourn the loss of their prophet. After 4 years of work by church members, work on the temple in Nauvoo stopped when the Saints learned of the death of their prophet Joseph Smith. A few weeks later, building recommenced and intensified as church members worked to complete the structure in order to receive promised temple blessings. After his death, Brigham Young, one of the Quorum of 12 Apostles and a friend of Smith's, assumed leadership of the church. While Brigham Young is not considered a founder, he will be discussed due to his massive influence on the Latter-day Saint movement. Before them jumping into Mr. Young, anything that stands out, pops up, any comment, feel free to go for it while I take a sip of water.
That Joseph Smith got everybody to realize that he got divine knowledge from Moron I. So
Yeah.
Moron I shared a lot of good information with me.
Could you imagine what it would have been like if he would have won the presidency
Yeah.
after he announced his candidacy? Oh, my stars, what a change of history.
That is a very interesting what if scenario to ponder. I mean, he was already mayor enough to go ahead at the moment that there is a press coming out to expose the errors of his ways and things, had it set, destroyed, reportedly even with a riot to full destroy it and get rid of the place. And there's such signs of something wrong with the lack of accountability of, I'm transcribing these things, no one can look at them. When you look at the gospel and anything here, it's there for everyone to see, because we're relying on God to help us, but also knowing I could read something wrong. I want you to be reading the same book as me, so you can help me and I can help you and God can help us both.
Well, where are the original plates?
Yeah, where are those gold plates though?
They're not there. I seem to remember something about them supposedly reappearing, like maybe the Covenant of the Ark, Covenant of the Ark or something. Ark of the Covenant.
You need Indiana Jones out there to find them.
That's good. It's actually surprising that there hasn't been a movie to that effect.
Uh-oh, it's coming out next year.
Prophesied here today. You witnessed it. All right. Brigham Young, born in Vermont as the 9th of 11 children. Okay. I had to double check that just for a moment because of the 9th of 11th children made me think of the other stat, and for a split second the admin me was going, oh no, something got copied and pasted. It did not. Try that again. Born in Vermont in year 1801, Brigham was the 9th of 11 children to a farmer and Revolutionary War veteran, John Young, and his wife, Abigail Howe. The Howe Young family were devout members of the Methodist. What's that?
Not Methodist.
Thank you. That was another one of those words that randomly my brain no longer can remember how to pronounce. Methodist Episcopal faith. In 1804, the Howe Young family moved to New York when Brigham Young was 3 years old. The family later left the Methodist Episcopal faith and became a part of the Reformed Methodist Church. In 1815, after his mother died, he left home to make his living as a carpenter and painter. Brigham was 14 years old at this time. 6 years later, in 1821, Brigham is quoted as saying, "It was not until my 22nd year that I became serious and religiously inclined. Soon after this I attached myself to the Methodist Church." In 1824, he married Miriam Angeline Works, and they embraced the Methodist faith together. Brigham Young's father, John Young, and brother Phineas Young also became Reformed Methodist preachers. In April of 1830, while returning from one of his trips preaching for the Methodist Church, Phineas Young was quoted as saying, "A young man came in and walked across the room to where I was sitting, held a book towards me, saying, 'This is a book, sir, I wish you to read.' I hesitated, saying, 'Pray, sir, what book have you?' 'The Book of Mormon, or as it is called by some, the Golden Book, the Golden Bible,' he replied. Phineas purchased the volume and took it home, as he described it, 'to make myself acquainted with its errors so I could expose them to the world.' However, he reluctantly admitted, 'To my surprise, I could not find the errors I anticipated, but felt a conviction that the book was true.' Phineas gave his father and brother the book to read as well. On April 5th of 1832, Phineas Young and his father John were baptized as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. On April 6th of the same year, Phineas's brother John Young was baptized as a member, and on April 15th, Brigham Young was baptized as a member of the same Church of Latter-day Saints. His wife Miriam was baptized 3 weeks later. On September 8th of that very year, Young's wife died from tuberculosis. In 1833, as an elder of the Church of Latter-day Saints, Young relocated to Kirtland, Ohio to help build the kingdom. A few months after arriving in Kirtland, he married his second wife, Mary Ann Angela of Seneca, New York. In 1835, he became an original member of the Quorum of 12 Apostles, a church governing body under Joseph Smith. Young was the third most senior member of the Apostles due to his age. On June 14th, 1842, after learning about plural marriage from Joseph Smith, Brigham Young married the first of his polygamous wives, Lucy Ann Decker Seeley, at age 41. Decker was 20. After his first plural marriage, Young married 3 more times before Smith's murder in 1844. Young did not live with any of his additional wives, and they bore him no children during these years. After the 1944 assassination of Joseph Smith, Brigham Young proposed to the other apostles who ran the church, to run the church, and most of the Mormons who lived in Nauvoo. I think there's a word missing. Hold on one second. Okay. After the assassination of Joseph Smith, Brigham Young proposed that the 12 apostles run the church, and most of the Mormons who lived in Nauvoo, Illinois, agreed with him. During the year following Joseph Smith's death, Young married around 15 more women. Not long after Joseph Smith's death, conflicts between Mormons and non-Mormons in Illinois continued. The following are some examples. On September 14th, the police had 3 men flogged because they were not in good fellowship with the church. On September 16th, Phineas Wilcox was stabbed to death by fellow Mormons in Nauvoo because he was believed to be a Christian spy. Wilcox was last seen as 3 Mormons led him toward the Masonic Hall. Wilcox's stepfather, Orrin Rhodes, inquired after him and searched for him for a week, finally concluding that he'd been murdered. Frank Worrell, a Carthage jail guard who failed to protect Joseph Smith, was murdered on September 16, shot out of his saddle by Porter Rockwell. Again, on September 16th, Rockwell also killed 4 unnamed anti-Mormons at Highland Branch near Warsaw. Andrew Daubenhire disappeared on the road to Carthage on September 18th. He was later found buried in a shallow grave near a campsite on the Carthage Road with a musket ball through the back of his head. In due time, he was given a proper burial with a headstone that read, "Killed by the Mormons." Later in September, several saints captured a young man by the name of McBracken, who was accused of burning Mormon homes. McCracken's friends found his body the next day and reported that after shooting him in 2 or 3 places, they cut his throat from ear to ear, stabbed him through the heart, cut off one ear, and horribly mutilated other parts of him. Mormon apostles Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde ordered the killing of apostate Lambert Symes, who subsequently disappeared without a trace. The autumn of 1845 in Nauvoo clearly demonstrated that the Mormons and non-Mormons of Hancock County would never learn to live together in peace. Therefore, wrote Brigham Young, we propose to leave this county next spring for some point so remote that there will not need to be a difficulty with the people and ourselves. In the midst of the unrest the Mormons were facing, on November 1845, Young had the attic story of the Nauvoo Temple dedicated, and the temple was operating around the clock while work to complete the remainder of the building continued. Tensions with other communities continued to escalate, and a year later, over 2,000 armed anti-Mormons marched on Nauvoo. Young decided that it was no longer wise to stay in the area as a result. I find it interesting in his quote that he says that they'll go to a point so remote there won't be any difficulties with the people themselves, when very clearly some of the violence they permitted was against their own group. Some was against anti-Mormons, but others were on people who they had suspicion of dissenting. They killed a guy for apostasy, which based on knowing what we just studied about that term in the first session of this, if there was an apostasy of Mormonism, that was someone who was didn't necessarily have an idea of what truth was yet, but just wasn't so confident that Mormonism was it anymore. Got killed. So going to a remote point, it's not exactly at all going to remove tension from within with a cult like this. Starting in 1846, due to increasing pressure from their enemies, Smith began the migration of 16,000 Mormons from Illinois to a land outside the western border of the United States, currently controlled by Mexico, that they originally claimed as Deseret. Deseret's boundaries included the present-day state of Utah, most of present-day Nevada and Arizona, and parts of Southern California, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, Oregon, and Idaho. Soon afterward, the U.S. claimed the land as part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War. In early 1846, Young's rate of marriage peaked when he married nearly 20 additional wives in the newly dedicated Nauvoo Temple. Young always wanted polygamy to be part of the wider culture. Brigham called it one of the best doctrines ever published. Recent studies have found 55 well-documented marriages. When the Saints entered the territory now known as the Salt Lake City Valley in 1847, at least 196 men and 521 women had entered into plural marriages. Participants in these early plural marriages pledged to keep their commitment confidential, though they anticipated a time when the practice would be publicly acknowledged. In December of 1847, Brigham Young was officially ordained as the second president of the church and their prophet, and announced that he would see a temple built in Deseret. It's very interesting to me, the concept of being in a plural marriage, but then them working so hard to go ahead and keep that secret. I can't see especially for the time of it starting, I can't imagine what lies were spun to create this idea of it being a benefit. If you're not the first person married who gets to publicly be shown as this person's spouse, once you're number 2 and beyond, you're married, but it can't be obvious. So how much interaction do you get at all?
Well, in one part it said that he married 20 women, but never lived with them, or never, well.
I never heard.
Maybe did other things than live with them, but never lived with them.
I never heard that he had a lot of children, so
Yeah.
maybe he didn't.
And that's the thing, at least up to that point, had 20 plus wives, but no children from any of them.
Yeah.
So it makes it interesting to wonder, what is the part of it being preached that's meant to be doctrine and appeal when it's not even a complete marriage package, apparently. But for Young, from the time that it was introduced, felt it was one of the best doctrines ever published in his own words.
But there's no, I mean, I never looked into it, but is there any reason why you marry many women except to populate the earth? But he didn't.
Yeah. And I have to think
Same way I
that,
had
I
three
mean,
wives.
from what was seen in Joseph Smith's, like, developing of beliefs, you started with this concept of eternal marriage, and there's a part of me that I personally would have to go ahead and look deeper. There's a part of me that couldn't help but wonder if there was an aspect to which salvation was then tied to it. So, if marriage is eternal and you're talking about things that are eternal, then if maybe that was how you saw this person in eternity. So I want to make sure I marry that person no matter what number I am. That way I'm with them in eternity. To see this person and be connected to them in eternity. You know, who do you want to hang out with? Marry him. I'm not saying that for certain, but it's crossed my mind and trying to, same thing, try to figure out, based on what hadn't happened yet, what were they being told?
Yeah.
You know?
But they were good up until the apostles died. Right, the original apostles? Isn't that what we covered, or was that something else?
That the church went
For-
wrong after, since the apostles'
Right.
death, it just pretty much
It's
went in
where-
the wrong direction.
Right.
Of the that comment, of Joseph Smith's belief and of the Mormon belief, that was coming. So that statement that was read a couple minutes ago, those were reportedly the prophet Mormon's words about Jesus Christ's original 12 apostles, not the Mormon 12 apostles.
Right.
That after the original 12 apostles, everything fell apart away from where it was supposed to be, and this is all part of the revived religion of what God intended.
But so what did they think about the writings of the original apostles then? Because some of the stuff that we're going through contradicts what the original apostles wrote.
Well, that's the thing. Their stories, they can say for themselves what the truth is about what the apostles actually spoke versus how it was falsely recorded.
Well, the Book of Mormon supersedes the Bible, the way I understand it.
Right, because the Bible has errors and things are misrecorded, which is why you have this rabbit trailing of beliefs. So, in Joseph Smith's eyes, and then passed down to other followers, this angel has come because history has been misrecorded. Therefore, we've been basing off of non-truth, and this is how things have gotten derailed. So when I ask, what church do I join? The answer is, none of them. They've all gotten it wrong. Here's the real history. Here's how it really happened. In October of 1848, back in Illinois, the temple at Nauvoo was destroyed by an arsonist's fire that left only the limestone outer walls intact. In the next year, Young established the Perpetual Emigrating Fund Company to help Mormons move from Illinois to Deseret. Also in 1849, the Mormons now living in the Utah Territory petitioned to enter the Union as the state of Deseret. Statehood would give the region more autonomy through its own elected state government and representatives. Their petition was denied. However, as a territory, Utah came under the direct control of Congress, and Brigham Young was appointed territorial governor. He resented any infringement on his authority. During the years of between 1852 and 1857, the Perpetual Emigrating Fund Company assisted approximately 8,000 converts to migrate to Utah from Great Britain, Scandinavia, and continental Europe.
It says 80.
What's that?
80,000.
On the screen?
Yeah.
Did I say 8?
Yeah.
It says 80 in here too. I misread it. 80,000.
That's a little bit more.
Yeah. 80,000 converts from, not even from the United States.
Right.
So that tells you how far their missionaries are going and what kind of a reach and an influence that they're coming from Great Britain, Scandinavia, and other areas of Europe. 80,000, helping finance them to move to Utah.
Have you ever heard of the Donner Party?
Nope.
They were a group of Mormons, but they were going on to California. And they got caught because there was lack of leadership in the covered wagon train. They got caught in Lake Tahoe and in the snowstorm, and it began to build up. Eventually, the snowpack got to be 40 feet deep, and all those people starved to death. The ones that died were eaten by the others, and that's how they survived.
Wow.
There's a movie or something, a documentary I did see.
Probably is a documentary, but
Yeah.
if you go to the Lake Tahoe, you'll see it, go right down Highway 80, there's a park right there. There's this huge statue, a platform, 40 foot tall, and that's what, the statue is standing on a 40 foot platform to show you how deep the snow was.
Oh,
Wow. That's honestly, to give people a visual representation, that's a pretty smart idea to put something on top of 40 feet. Because to say 40 feet, to try to picture that in your mind versus actually look at something that's 40 feet
Yeah.
tall, is one of
They
those.
lived like rats, they had tunnels carved out. And then some of them tried to make it, get help, and eventually someone did. But it's too late for most of them.
Wow. There is, let's see, about 4 of these slides left, which works with wrapping up the end of this. So it looks like we will get through this section. So we'll continue to go ahead and jump back in to wrap that up for the night. So continuing with Brigham Young, in 1853, he began the construction of the Salt Lake Temple. In 1857, there was what was known as the Mormon War. Due to Young's treatment of federal officials and his harsh rhetoric against the president, his quote being, "Any president of the United States who lifts his finger against this people shall die an untimely death and go to hell," plus the Mormon practice of plural marriage, caused conflict to arise. The U.S. president at the time declared the Mormons to be in rebellion in 1857 and sent an army west to put them down. No soldiers battled in that short-lived conflict, but it spawned the infamous Mountain Meadows Massacre. Following the Mormon-led massacre of 120 people in a westward-bound wagon train at Mountain Meadow in the fall of 1857, public opinion regarding the church deteriorated. Deseret's prospects for statehood continued to dim. The president then went on to pardon the Mormons in 1858, but they were still denied statehood. In 1861, during the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln told a Mormon representative to Washington, D.C., "You go back and tell Brigham Young that if he will let me alone, I'll let him alone." In this period of Mormon isolation, Young, having given up his governorship, built the insularity of the Mormons against the territory's encroaching non-Mormon population. In 1861, Young contracted for the national expansion of telegraph line from Nebraska to California, and then erected the 1,200-mile Deseret telegraph line from Franklin, Idaho to northern Arizona to connect all Mormon villages with one another and with Salt Lake City. In 1862, polygamy became illegal in the United States, making polygamy a felony. It's important to note that at this time, Deseret was not a state but a U.S. territory. The current law makes polygamy punishable by up to 5 years in prison. It can be up to 15 years if the polygamists are found to have committed fraud, domestic violence, sexual abuse, or human smuggling. For modern times, in February of 2020, the Utah Senate on Friday gave final approval, 27-1, to a bill that would reduce polygamy among consenting adults to an infraction, an offense below some traffic tickets, essentially decriminalizing the practice. Polygamy among consenting adults is still officially considered a crime in Utah. The bill's sponsor, Senator Henderson, has said her intent was to lessen the penalties to dissuade law enforcement from pursuing charges against people who are breaking no other laws, as the story is. Also, going back to 1862, President Brigham Young announced that the foundation of the temple would have to be torn out and replaced as cracks had started to appear. It became apparent that the foundation would not be able to hold the immense weight of the granite structure. Almost 10 years after the groundbreaking, workers had to start over from scratch. According to Professor Richard Cohen, the walls did not reach ground level until the end of the construction season in 1867, 14 years after the original cornerstones were laid. In 1863, Brigham announced plans to construct the Mormon Tabernacle in Salt Lake City. The tabernacle was built on the west centerline axis of the Salt Lake Temple. Construction of the tabernacle began July 26, 1864. The tabernacle would go on to be the location of the church's semi-annual general conference for 132 years. In 1868, Young also contracted to prepare the roadbed for part of the Transcontinental Railroad line and then organized railroads to proved rail support for most Mormon communities in Idaho, Utah, and Nevada. Because of his influence, Utah gave women the vote in 1870, recognized their political equality, and which also added to the Mormon vote. This occurred 50 years before the 19th Amendment became national law. Essentially, women in Utah were the first to the polls for all elections without property restrictions. In 1871, Young was tried but not convicted for polygamy, and also escaped prosecution in the only legal proceedings around the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Again, it's important to note that at the time, Deseret was not a state, but a territory. In 1875, Young founded the Brigham Young University, the University of Deseret, now University of Utah, and the Salt Lake Theater. 2 years later, at the age of 76, Brigham Young died in his home in Salt Lake City. The cause of his death is believed to be peritonitis, the result of a ruptured appendix. When he died, 50,000 people came to pay their respects.
That Mormon tabernacle is kind of a marvel. Supposedly, it's such a good acoustics that you can stand on the stage and whisper, and they can hear you all the way in the back.
Wow. That would be pretty impressive acoustics.
Yeah.
It's the way it's curved too, has something to do with it.
That I can see.
Yeah. There's,
But if you go there today,
there's a local example of that too,
a local example,
of how the roundness of a building, if you're on one side of this place and you're talking, a normal voice, people can hear it on the other end without any kind of microphones or anything like that.
The story writer narrative part of my mind is sitting here going, if this was a movie, I feel like a building would be designed for the express purpose to make sure you could spy on and hear what everybody was saying at all times.
Absolutely.
To remove the idea for conspiracy. There was a
if you go there today, if you want to do genealogy, well, I haven't been there in 20 years, but there was this huge skyscraper, and it's where they've collected all the genealogy material for the whole nation there. So if you want to do a genealogical research, that's one of the places you can go.
wow.
And they'll have like county records from every county in USA.
Wow. There are 3 slides here. Your 3 other slides, which you have printed out. 2 of the slides cover just some other key leaders who came up and the big things that they were famous for bringing about. And then the final is a type of big picture timeline type chart between some of their history. With us already being up to closing time, these are 2 slides that you guys can for sure go ahead and just read to go ahead and see or look at that picture.
Can you
Yes.
put up the last one for?
The image?
Yes, please.
Yep, there you go. So if you guys want to go ahead and take a picture of that, feel free. I'll go ahead and leave it up to wrap up for the night, if you were not here tonight, then don't forget to go ahead and put in your chat comments for each of the sessions. Those are different than anything that's a chat discussion that Amanda puts forward for additional class participation. So don't forget to do that. The first quiz is live tomorrow morning. I will have, well, for you guys watching the video, by Friday, January 7th of that morning, the instructor notes to this set of slides will be uploaded. That way you can look at detailed notes and reference back to things that were not on your slides, but that I was reading through, and even just for your own recap when it comes to all that history that we covered in this hour. Any questions on any of that, any of the assignments?
I'm gonna borrow this one.
You got it. All right, then without further ado, then that's the end of session 3. Have a good night, safe travels for everyone, and we'll see you next week.